everybody. Welcome to the EACD 2013 here at the UBS Grunhof. A few people at the reception were asking me, what is this facility about here at UBS? What do you normally use this for? And it's a place where we have our town halls. We use this a lot for our communications. We have our quarterly results here. We have analyst meetings and some ad hoc press conferences, usually discussing litigation and regulatory issues lately. So hopefully tonight, this is going to be one of the more pleasant events that this facility has been used for. Anyway, my name's Tim Cobb, and I'm the head of Group External Communications at UBS for the last 5 months here in Zurich. I was the Chief Communications Officer in APAC for UBS before that. And I've worked for Merrill Lynch before that, and in a number of countries in New York and London and Hong Kong, Sydney, and now in Zurich, which has been a very good experience. But a variety of CEOs and chairmen, and all with very different strategies with their communications. So I think this topic tonight is going to be a very interesting one. And for us, particularly in the banking world, right now, I think, from what I've seen in my career, is it's probably no time that I've ever seen is working closely with a CEO and taking communications extremely seriously, because it's a reputation on the line every single day. And we have a CEO who really appreciates that, and we're at the table with him on a regular basis. So I do see a lot of familiar faces even in this. This is the first time we've hosted this and the first time I've attended this, but I think it seems like a great organization, great group of people. And I'd like to hand over to the woman who needs no introduction, since I just heard she's the founder of this, or one of the founders, Florence. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, and good evening, everybody. But I may still need an introduction because I don't know everybody. So my name is Florence Ranson, and I'm the Managing Vice President of the EACD. And yes, I was one of the founders 7 years ago in a hotel room in Brussels, and here we are. So it's great. I hope we can move on along those lines, and it's thanks to you. And a big thank you to Tim and to UBS for hosting tonight's event and making this afternoon's meetings possible as well. There were several meetings of working groups. We also had a board meeting in these great facilities, so thanks a lot. We're very happy to continue the tradition of the forum of the EACD. It's our winter event, and it allows us to get together in the middle of the year in between two European summits in Brussels. Every year we go to a different place, and we're very happy that we had the opportunity of coming to Switzerland this year, because Switzerland has always been a very strong region in the EACD network, a very large membership and a very active and committed membership. I would like to highlight a few recent developments in our network, and to go back to things that we continue doing. Of course, we continue with the traditional element, in particular the regional meetings and the working group meetings. And I'd like to thank our coordinators, both regional coordinators and working group coordinators, who make this possible at regional level, and who have brought many of you here tonight, and who do the same at national level on a very regular basis. So thanks a lot for their support and their commitment. Another new element we have introduced are the focus regions. We have introduced groups of 2 regions every 6 months. So that's 4 regions which are put in the limelight every year. And for the second half of 2013, the 2 countries are Bulgaria and Switzerland. And in Switzerland, in particular, the focus has proven very relevant and very efficient. We have held several meetings. There's been a meeting at FIFA headquarters recently. There is one next week in Geneva at the Red Cross. There's another one planned at CERN, and of course there is tonight. And tonight, as Tim pointed out, we have chosen to discuss the role of the Chief Communications Officer and the C-suite, and how do they interact if they do. I should hope that they do, at least more rather than less. But certainly that question is a long-standing commitment for the EACD. It is something that has been on our agenda ever since the beginning. It is a question we have often debated, and we even debated it again this afternoon in our board meeting. Indeed, it's important to ensure recognition of the role of the communicators in organizations, but also the role of the communications function as a strategic tool in any organization. Now, does this mean that we need a seat at the executive table? And if so, how do we make optimal use of that privilege? Or is that even the relevant question to be asked? Don't things work another way? I think, the debate tonight will certainly help us make up our own mind, if not bring definite answers to all these questions. But we have carried out extensive research asking CEOs what their perception of their communications officers is, and we'll be happy to unveil those results. We're very grateful to Russell Reynolds for helping us in this research and for supporting the project. We're also very grateful to the Amsterdam School of Communications Research for coordinating it and analysing the outcome, and also to Ingmar de Gooijer, because Ingmar is our board member who initiated the research. So thanks a lot for that. And without further ado, I'd like to invite our speakers to join their seats and hand over to Robert Phillips, our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Florence. Thank you, Tim. Good evening and welcome. My name is Robert Phillips. I'm the co-founder of Jericho Chambers, which is a progressive communications consultancy. I'm also a visiting professor in public relations at Cass Business School in London and the author of Trust Me, Why the Future of Business is Safe in Our Hands, which you can all buy from next spring. The evening is going to be hopefully interactive and exciting. I'm aware that it's cold and it's dark, so we can create our own warmth and ambiance by jumping into the conversation. On my left, Marion Barge, who is an executive director of Russell Reynolds Associates. To her right, my immediate left, Robin Nuttall, a principal at McKinsey in London. Medar Schumachers, on my right, head of corporate communications at HSBC Private Bank, and to his right, Piet Verhoeven, professor at the Graduate School of Communications Research at the University of Amsterdam. And in a minute, I'm going to ask Piet to present an overview of the findings of the research that Florence mentioned. Before we do that, two things. One, I'm going to ask the panelists to each introduce themselves in no more than 140 characters, well, actually 2 lines. I asked them all to send me 2 lines, but being in communications, everyone either didn't send anything at all or sent me 3 lines. So I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, but just to outline the running order. Having introduced themselves, we're going to hand over to Piet, who's going to talk us through the research, and then I'm going to come back to the panel, ask them for 2 minutes on their thoughts on the research findings and any advice they would give immediately. And then I'm going to throw it straight open to you, the audience, and invite you to ask questions and challenge. What we're looking for here is debate, and I'd like some debate among the panel and some violent disagreement, if possible. And if not, I have notes written in red, which are my disagreeable questions to ask panelists, which I will come to. So, Marion, 2 lines or 140 characters.
That's right. Okay, with a legal background, I started my career with IBM, then moved into executive search for the last 20 years, of which 14 years with Russell Reynolds, where I had the communications and corporate affairs officers for Europe.
I'm Robin Nuttall. I'm a partner in McKinsey's London office, and I lead McKinsey's global government affairs and reputation practice. We're a practice that serves the world's leading companies on their key questions of external affairs, government, regulation, and reputation.
I'm Medar Schumachers. I started my career in banking actually as a banker, which was still a fashionable trade in those days. Then moved into communications. I've been in communications in various other sectors for 12 years. And actually, with the financial crisis, wanted to urge myself to go back into banking as a communicator, now combining the banking expertise with the communication expertise, which I think is a nice foundation for this evening's discussion.
Okay, my name is Piet Verhoeven, and I'm a senior lecturer and a researcher at the Amsterdam School of Communications Research. I conduct research in the area of corporate communication, and I started my career as a press officer of Schiphol Group, the Amsterdam airport. So I'm in science for the last 10 years, since 2002.
One of the things that worries me, thinking about the industry that I've worked in for nearly 30 years, is the lack of diversity. So obviously we're celebrating that with 3 Dutch people and 2 Brits on the panel. Anyway, Pete, would you like to take us through the research findings?
Right. I will, thank you. I'm going to stand here because I'm used to standing when talking. Chief communication officers and the C-suite, we did some research, and I'll give you a very brief overview of the research we've done. You've all have had the brochure where more results are published. But just to start off the discussion, we thought it might be a good idea to give you 4 sheets with the main conclusions of the research. So first of all, what were our research questions? They're here on the slide. Very basic ones, because there's not much research into this area, into the position of communication officers and the executive board. So the first question was really, how many communication professionals have a seat at the board? And we researched that among the Financial Times top 500 companies, because this is a very good European list and a ranking of companies who are very successful. The second question is, what kind of organizations have someone at the in the executive board, and what is the remit of them in terms of the CEO of the executive board? So this was a question about what are they bringing to the organization. And the third question was, are there any explaining factors which lead to having a seat in the board or not? We did 3 studies. It was the first studies done in this area, a content analysis of the websites of the FT 500 companies. We did a survey among human relations and human resources managers worldwide. And we did some interviews with CEOs, which is really an explorative part of the study. So the results from the content analysis show that 24.2% of the companies of the Financial Times 500 have a CCO in the executive board, meaning 75% or a little bit more do not have a CCO in the executive board. It also showed that it's more or less what I called a random distribution. So there are some significant differences in regions in the world. For example, North America and Europe have more CCOs in the board than other regions in the world, significantly. And also some sectors have more CCOs in the board, like healthcare, consumer and industry, have more communication officers in the board than, for example, finance and services industries. But we found no explaining factors in all kinds of economic variables, like market value, turnover, number of employees, all those kind of things did not have an effect on having an executive on the board or not, a CCO on the board or not. And we found there's a very weak but significant correlation between having a CCO on the board and a corporate marketing officer on the board. So they are more often together on the board. Well, we analyzed the job titles. There's a top 3. Most of them are called Senior Vice President Corporate Communication, followed by Senior Vice President Corporate Affairs, and Vice President Corporate Communication was the third in the list of job titles. Chief Communications Officer was only mentioned in 3 companies, so it's not a very common name. We also found that some countries, also a random group of countries, have more than 25% of their companies have CCOs in the board. Well, you see them listed here: Australia, Belgium, Finland, France, Israel, Norway, Saudi Arabia, Sweden, Thailand, and the US. Also a rather random group of countries. And we did not find a correlation between a CCO in the board and other communication disciplines in the board, like investor relations or public affairs, for example. So they are not related. Well, these facts were mainly also seen in the survey we did among human resources managers. About 107 of them returned the questionnaire. The main results are on this sheet, that if organizations have a CCO in the C-suite, then they are rated higher on business acumen, financial and operational skills, and they have more financial and strategic targets. This is correlational, so we don't know whether what causes what. So that's a good question for a next round of research. According to the human resources managers, media relations and internal communication are still the most important responsibilities for CCOs. And the most important competences for all, so not only for the ones in the board, but also for the ones not in the board, are communication skills, knowledge, business knowledge, leadership, and the business acumen. It's also considered very important. They're also rated on those competences, mainly on the first three on the sheet, and also rated on the ability to influence the media and public opinion, internal and external. So the demands that these human resources managers put on communication people are, first of all, a university degree. That's kind of basic. We also see in all kinds of other research. And they must be able to work with trust, with reputation, change, all very familiar terms, of course, for you. Have to work with change, lead multi-stakeholder relationships, and media building, cross-functional relationships and business alignment, so media and business coalition building, you could say, according to the human resources. Then we asked the CEOs. It was very difficult to get to speak to CEOs, which is probably also a result, but, well, it's not a very scientific result, so we cannot claim that. But it was very difficult to get them to speak about communication. The ones who did acknowledged the importance of communication for organizations, strategically as well as socially. So there's also an awareness among those CEOs that society is also asking for all kinds of legitimacy for the organization. The functions is sometimes viewed as too narrow, was said. So maybe we can discuss that later on. And it should be, they had kind of a list, it should be holistic and consistent, internal, external. We already saw that also for the human resources managers. Value-driven, and communication should do branding as well as synergizing all communication. So that's an interesting point, because you could also say that synergizing all communication is branding, but that's something different. Some critical challenges they said about communication. Crisis, this is a very important topic, coming up also in research very much, crisis communication. So managing crisis communicatively is seen as very important by the CEOs. Bridging the board and the external stakeholders, it's kind of the main task of communication. Learning the organization to behave as a citizen, this is an interesting point. And of course the social media and the new changing media landscape, handling that very well is also a very important critical challenge for communication people in the organizations. Well, there's a lot more to be said about this. There's a report and there's also a scientific report. So, but we cannot do that here. I'll leave you with this and I'll give the floor back to John.
Thank you, Pete. I've often wondered whether, as communications professionals, we're really frustrated advertising executives or, better still, frustrated management consultants. So it's a good idea to ask the first question of a proper management consultant. Robin, you slipped me a note in the middle of Pete talking saying, I do not, underline not, think CCO is a very good title. Happy to explain. Please do.
Okay, I'll kick the discussion off. And I'm going to get to that question, but just I want to complement Pete's research with some of the very brief highlights of research that we do every year with 3,500 executives. And I think this is extremely insightful in terms of how the CEOs view it. And our research you can summarize with 30% cubed. 30% cubed. So the first 30% is we find that CEOs now are spending roughly 30% of their time on external affairs, government affairs, and reputation issues and opportunities. So if you actually do the diary analysis, roughly 30% of the CEO's time is spent on your agenda. So it's a massive slug of the CEO's time. The second 30% is that 30% of the EBIT pool across most industries is at risk from government affairs, external affairs, regulatory decisions. And it's very different in different industries. In pharmaceuticals, it could be market access, it could be FDA decisions. In energy, it could be rates, it could be climate regulations. In banking, it could be core-tier capital requirements, it could be subsidiarization. But if you look across the board and we measure it, across the board, 30% of the profits in an industry is at stake, upside as well as downside, from effectively, again, the work that you do. So a huge amount of money is on the table from this topic. And the third 30% is that only 30% of our executives believe that they are successful in external affairs and reputation shaping. 70% of themselves see themselves as failures. So they're saying there's a lot of money here on the table, there's a lot of value for us, but we are failing to get it. And I think that's what makes this the exciting agenda to be involved in now, because it is very prominent and very salient with CEOs and with executives. But no one's really quite cracked the code as to how to succeed. And then to come back to Robert's question, I think that the challenge I have with the CCO title is, for a start, a lot of companies call CCO the Chief Commercial Officer or the Chief Customer Officer, which I think is a valid role, as the head of marketing and sales. And I just think it's a confusion that you don't want to run up against. But more fundamentally, I think the challenge with Chief Communication Officer is that you box yourself into the too narrow box, which Pete painted, which is of being in charge of messaging. Whereas what you really do, and why I prefer the corporate affairs title, is you help actually shape the strategy and the posture of the company. What is going to be my position on climate regulations? What's my position on obesity taxes or whatever it might be? So that's why I don't like the name CCO.
So your advice would be change the title in order to change the narrow definition?
Change your title as long as you also have a role which is broader than the messaging itself, which is important. It's necessary but not sufficient.
One of the things that struck me from the research was that statistic that 38% of healthcare companies are represented at board level, but only 19% of financial services companies. And you do wonder, especially in an age of transparency and accountability, that if more board level representation happened for communications people in the financial services sector, maybe some of the worst excesses of the crisis might have been averted. Which brings me neatly to you, Medar, as the resident banker.
I feel so.
Your thoughts on the research?
I think a lot of things, actually. But on your point, mind you, I think pharma has been a truly regulated industry for a much longer time than the financial industry has. I mean, we are fairly young when it comes to being a regulated industry. So I think that you see a more mature approach in the pharma industry. I'm actually surprised to take one of the findings linked to this. I'm surprised that there is that we don't see more CCOs in the regulated industries than in the non-regulated industries. I would expect actually that, because what you see in pharma or healthcare companies, you see already a more natural bundling of public affairs, of all the stakeholder relations in coming together in one job at a higher level. And I'm surprised actually that we don't see a far higher percentage of CCOs in regulated industries. That was a key thing for me, stuck out.
Marion, your thoughts on the research? Were there any surprises in there, given your day job?
Yeah, well, there are of course surprises in the fact that still I think a lot of CEOs consider communications or CCOs the traditional media and external and internal communications executives, which I think is a pity, because I think they should go and look much broader, and they should know that it's a much broader function than just the traditional media guru. Talking to CEOs, I think they believe that the function is too narrow. To narrow, what they mean with that is that it's internal, external communications, it's maybe CSR, maybe corporate affairs, but they don't believe that that is sufficient to give a seat at the board table. So I think it's interesting and open for debate. Should we need a C-suite position? But if we want to, then I think at least we need to broaden our profession in a little bit further with more experience, broader experience, more in-depth, more insight, and being really the counsel of the CEO.
So Marion's raised an interesting challenge, because you use the word should, whether we should have CCO representation at board level. So with a show of hands, can we just see who thinks that there should be representation at board level, and those that think that there should not? So those that think that there should not, especially in my direct line of sight, I'm going to come back to you for questions straight away. But before I come to you to start thinking about the question, you have 2 minutes to think about it. Pete, on Marion's point about this sort of narrow base, one of the quotes that you used from the CEO was, "If they can help me think like a citizen, think and behave like a citizen." It's my personal passion point. Do you want to bring that to life a bit?
Yes, well, this corporate citizenship, as you could say, is one of the things I think that they are talking about. Thinking like a citizen is also looking at the organization from the outside world. I think that's the main issue for a communication department or a communication discipline, that they should, well, you can call it a mirror, put a mirror in front of the organization, how others are looking at them. And if you know how other people think about you, or how how society thinks about you, then you can get a legitimation for your organization, and then you can be a citizen. That's one point, I think. The other point is that a lot of things that that the governments used to do are now being, well, put on the plate of organizations or of corporations. So I think CEOs, they see this and they want something with that, but what should they do? Because also it's very difficult if you do all kinds of charity or those kind of things. Is that enough, or is it just perceived as a window dressing for your organization to do even worse things or whatever? So these are the two things I think that can be said about being a corporate citizen. And I think that's a very important task of communication people.
And I think as the evening goes on, we'll explore this sort of narrow base and indeed the title in which we've got trapped. One of the other data points that I thought was interesting was how low a proportion of people are responsible for public policy. So again, in the big affairs that affect commercial decisions taken by CEOs, only I think it was 19, maybe 17% of people actually had responsibility for public policy. Right, I'm going to throw it open to questions. We've got microphones either side. Please raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. I'm going to start right in front of me. with a justification of or why they should not have a seat at the boardroom table. This gentleman here, if you could just say who you are and the organisation you represent, that would be great.
Yes, my name is Mark Kloosterman from VIM Group. And the reason that I think that communication officer should not necessarily be in the board is that, well, I would like to go back to your comment on the fact that 30%, if you analyze the time that the CEO is spending, well, to me, what I listen from how you phrase that is that he spends or she spends 30% of his or her time on external relations, communication, and the like of things. So I think it's extremely important. And, well, so if you are a CEO, I think you would think, at least that's so important, you do that yourself. So if that's 30% of your time, then, of course, there needs to be a function that facilitates all of that for the whole organization and enables a smooth, well, way of doing communications with the outer world and how you are part of society and the larger ecosystem. But my grasp would be that being a CEO, you would think it's so important that, well, that's what you do yourself. And then automatically, well, I could imagine that being a CFO is not something he will do or she will do himself. So that's why you want to have someone very specialized, very close, to have that responsibility. But of course, it's just a one-man's view, so happy to discuss.
We're going to pass the microphone, I think.
Yes, my name is Ingmar de Gooijer. I'm a board member of the EACD. Now, the valid point done by the McKinsey gentleman here is about the title. I agree completely. I think the CEO is actually the chief communications officer. I think for any company, he is the one that will actually represent the views of the company. But going back to the question on the board or not, I think a more interesting question is, what is more important, that you have direct access and direct reporting to the CEO, or if you actually have a seat at the table? And I would like to hear your views on that question.
That's a great challenge. So maybe, Marianne, do you want to take that question? Is it a question of access or is it a question of title?
Yeah, I do agree. I think access, of course, Ingmar, is the most important. If you have a formal seat at the table, I think you don't have then second-hand of information that needs to go through other people or through the CEO. Often what is said, but we have a direct reporting line to the CEO. So we have, it's a kind of duo, a very special relationship between the communications director and the CEO. But I think if you miss that background on how the decisions are made in the board, you miss also a lot of information. The CEO doesn't have time to go over all that information to give the exact background of the decisions. If a CCO is really adding value in a way that they can shape and impact the decision, then it's more than just transactional kind of making sure that the message comes across. I think it's really impacting, shaping the business developments and the business decisions. Now, what we hear from CEOs often is that they don't have enough of business acumen to be respected by other board members, sorry to say for this crowd, but by the other board members. They are very much respected by the communication, for their communication skills, but they can't enough follow or add value to discussions about finance, operations, HR, and so on. And so there is a kind of issue that they feel that they are highly respected for what they are doing functional-wise, but going across the function, adding value in the board to the other discussions is more of an issue.
On this question of adding value, Robin has published in the McKinsey Quarterly, and in that he said there are three things that CEOs and communications people must understand. One is about engagement, one is about skills, the other is about value and where we add value. And I challenged him before we sort of joined the panel about how you measure the value that a communications officer would add. Do you want to bring that to life a bit, Robin?
Yeah, and it's not an easy question. There's no silver bullet. So it's in some sense, if you look at the development of marketing over the last 20 years, it's moved from being a sort of gut instinct kind of role. I know that 50% of my marketing spend doesn't work. I just don't know which 50% it is. That's where marketing has come from. And then it moved through ROI, return on investment on my marketing spend. And now it's much more measurable because I can measure my marketing spend in, Facebook, Twitter, Google, or whatever. So marketing has made that journey, I think, from being, a relatively gut instinct, unprofessionalized, if you will, function to now having a set of measures and metrics. And I think for corporate affairs is making the same journey, but in general is not quite at the same maturity. And I think part of it is having measures that show how much value you create as a function. It's very easy for the head of operations to say how much value they created last year, because you just say, look at the cost line and look at the quality results and look at safety. And then you can see how much value I added. For the head of corporate affairs, you've got to do something which is more tailored. So one oil company that we work with measures the value at stake that the corporate affairs function defends and then creates at 3 horizons. Horizon number 1 is cash impact. So if there is a tax on refined outputs or something in Nigeria, that has an immediate impact which you can actually measure. And you can say, well, if it was 8% rather than 20%, that's a measurable thing. The second thing is net present value. If I help you get into a new market, if I help a large mining company get into a new market, you can actually measure the net present value of that new growth. And the third horizon is reputation. And reputation is much more difficult to quantify, but you can only look at the stock price impacts of companies which have recently had reputational challenges to see again how you can get to quantification. So if you think about it at those 3 horizons, cash impacts of changes, net present value, and putting some rough dollar number on it, and then reputational impacts and how you've preserved and enhanced that, then I think you have a charter for the value that you've added to the business.
Medar, the industry has traditionally struggled with evaluating anything properly. It's probably one of our greatest Achilles heels. Do you think that hinders the way that CEOs see the communications profession and professionals?
Yeah, I think we kind of did it to ourselves a bit. I think we have too long focused on promoting communications. So promoting media relations and internal communications, that's the thing that had to be found important. And by finding that important, we would actually get that recognition and therefore get the board seat. I think when I look back personally, I believe we have been focusing on the wrong thing, because with that came the question, and it is our $64 million question. I hope you all recognize that. How do you then measure that, right? How do you measure that media impact or employee comms impact? And we don't know. And I think if we should stop focusing on promoting the comms trade, we should actually start to sort of integrate more in becoming engaged in the business and wanting to help actually the business thrive and look more at the business objectives and how we can support that. Because with that actually comes, I think, less of an urgency to start valuing us on measurement values and all kind of difficult valuations, because there'll be a more natural value that becomes visible actually in how we support the business. And increasingly what you see is that sustainability has moved on, as we all know, from the do-good factor to how can we help. How can we help the business become more sustainable? Well, that is much easier measurable, and it's much easier actually to see what value we add when you look at that in that way. So I would say stop promoting the comms trade as such, and start becoming more engaged with the actual business.
So we have to change the title, measure our outputs, and basically completely change the frame of reference within which we work.
Well, we're not happy with how things are proceeding now. So yeah, let's try something else.
No, which is great. So my question to Pete is, if this was an audience of CEOs and they heard those initial responses, would they be surprised that's what chief communications officers are thinking?
Well, probably yes. I think they'll be surprised. Yeah. I think that they. Well, don't think in these kind of terms about communications, but more in the practical terms, in the narrow sense that you mentioned in the beginning, and which also comes from the research. So I don't think that they do, but communication professionals have the task to make them see that, I think. And I agree with your questions that CEO should do the external communication for a greater part himself, him or herself. But there's still something special to communication, I think, and to, especially in this mediated world, becoming more and more saturated with media, and this is not going to stop. But how all these media work together and how what kind of effects that has on the organization, but also on society, that's an important question that you cannot do from an amateur point of view if you studied law or something and you are a CEO. So there is something special about communication, but it should be on a higher level than now usually is perceived by the CEO, I think. Well, one more thing. Since I'm in science, I'm really surprised how little social scientific information gets to the practice of communication. If doctors would do that, we would all be sick. Right. Because there are journals, there is research internationally very much about communication and the effects of it, but you do not see very much of that in the daily practice of communication. So that might be a way to go.
Thank you. I'm going to throw it back out to the audience. I'm going to take 3 questions if we have 3 people who'd like to ask a question. Gentleman here, gentleman there, 1, 2. Do you have a third? I feel like I'm an auctioneer now. You've already had a question. You want another question? Okay. In case we don't find a third question, we'll come back there as well.
My name is Mark Redgrove. I'm on the board of the EACD. Should HR not be rebriefed?
Should
That's my
HR
question.
not be rebriefed? Okay, thank you. The question there?
Hello, my name's Patrick Wilson. I've got a small consultancy in Basel. It's been about 10 years now. This question is for Pete. Did you do any kind of breakdown about CCOs, or whatever you want to call them, the Chief Communication Officers, sitting on executive committees in Switzerland?
Pete, do you want to answer that directly, quickly?
Yeah, I don't think so, no. So it's an easy question. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, because I mean, in Basel, for Novartis, Syngenta, and Roche, 3 right away sitting on the executive committee. And I think it needs seriously laden issues companies to get that person on there.
Mm-hmm. Well, we researched the FT 500, so they should be in this group then. Otherwise, they're not included in the research. It's a sampling problem.
Yeah, maybe I happen to work in one of those 3 companies in Basel, so I have a bit of insight. But I think all these 3 companies have recognized that the regulated companies, heavily regulated companies, they've recognized that they need to do an enormous lot on all those different stakeholder groups, and have pulled that together in sort of corporate affairs typey positions, and Syngenta being the last now with having appointed a board member, right? So I think it's for those it's an element of understanding that there's several important stakeholder groups that they need to reach out to all of them. That it's vital to their business, and therefore they've made that person an equal, a peer at a board level. Yeah.
On this, the question was, the first question was, should HR not be rebriefed? I have a supplementary question on that, which is that quite often you find that communications reports to HR. So my question is, what would it take for HR to report to communications? It's a serious question. So anyway, Marion, 2 questions there.
Yeah, I think, traditionally internal communication, engagement, and that part can be under communications or under HR. It depends on the organization where it sits, really. So, but to do it the other way around, I haven't seen it yet, but maybe there is an example.
We have an example in Holland.
That's true.
We have one example where ING Group, there's now splitting up in insurance and banking, and the director of communications has now operations and HR, and became a member of the board. So it's a first, perhaps, but hopefully many to follow.
My point is more the rebriefing of HR. The role is quite clearly changing, and HR are putting they're trying to jam square pegs in round holes.
You could argue, of course, that HR has a vested interest in not promoting PR in case they end up reporting to them, but yeah.
It becomes the ING.
Yeah.
But I do think that HR need to be rebriefed in terms of the profiles that you need to be successful in corporate affairs. Because, and I don't think there's one static profile, but some of the different profiles that I've seen, one profile has business experience and has come from running a business unit or operations of a business unit and then comes into corporate affairs. That's one good profile. Another one is somebody who's worked in strategy or finance. That's another good profile. So I think there's a number of different profiles, but typically I think the skills include communications, but are broader than that. If you're going to be a successful head of communications.
Marion, do you want to make a...
Maybe to add, I think if it goes about the CCO level, often the CEO is involved in that recruitment and not the HR. They do the profiling, but they, of course, do a very close communication with the CEO, what exactly needs to be there. And what I hear back from the CEO is that it's very, very difficult to find the right profile. And that they need to make a choice between, do I want a real communications profile, so internal, external communications profile, and going in depth and can leave it to that person on all communications aspects, or do I want to go broader to that less narrow profile, and that seems to be quite difficult. So they are very much involved, the CEO. I think HR is, I won't say just more executing it, but I think the role between, or the relationship between the CEO and the CCO is unique in such a way that the chemistry needs to be well, they need to trust each other. So often when you see that the CEO is leaving, the CCO is leaving afterwards as well. We see if the CEO is gone, we see that normally 80% of the CCOs is within a year and a half leaving as well. So that's enormous. So there is a very close, I think the relationship between CEO and CCO is much closer than with HR.
Which underlines the point that it is the access.
Yeah,
access
absolutely.
rather than membership.
Yeah.
Pete, if you were to rework this research in 3 years' time or 5 years' time with a rebriefed HR department, do you think you'd see some of these metrics shift?
I hope so, yeah. If you're talking about rebriefing HR, then they should have a broader view of communication. That's one thing. And they, should give back some other demands than they do now, I think, yeah.
And Medard, to bring to life a bit more your ING example, what do you think it would take to invert the relationship between HR and PR, as it were, and to really put communications where the ING communications person sits on a more broad basis?
I think we've got to prove ourselves as business people, right? So it starts with, and that's why I think it will help us enormously to be sitting on that board, because you will be seen as a peer, you will be taken more seriously, but then you will only be taken more seriously in your position when you truly start to engage in the business. And sitting on an executive committee, on an executive board, is not about just your little thing. As soon as you join an executive board, you will join that joint responsibility for running the business. So we got to start making an effort to engage actually at a business level in the business issues and not sit there until the comms question is being asked and then provide a professional right answer. And I think when you do that and you start to become more sort of a business savvy member of the board, then actually I think you also start to earn the recognition of being able to take on a broader responsibility beyond just communications, and that's how you'd grow into broadening your remit.
And in fact, it's a point, Robin, that you made in your McKinsey Quarterly article about the sort of broader skill set of the communications professional.
which you need if you are going to, broaden that role out. And I think one of the potential explanations for why the distribution is random is that it's down to the personality and conviction of the individual in those different companies. And the ones that have the conviction and the motivation to make themselves relevant, earn themselves a seat on the executive board.
So from an executive search point of view and from sort of placing the right people in the right roles, is there a need to redefine ourselves as a professional group? And is there a need to become, to your words, Marion, less transactional and more business savvy?
I think definitely if you as communications professional would stay more transactional, I think it's difficult to move up to the C-suite or to the board level. So indeed, it's important to have that business acumen and understand the business inside out, bring that business from the outside inside to the management and to the board. I think that's very important. But to change the professional, I don't think so. I think it's just to add something to it, and that is really to gain more business experience. If we discussed on the phone, if you ask professors from MBAs how many of their group is communications professional, very few of them are coming from the communication profession. So I think we can add a lot more of experience, broader experience, more business focused to the job that we are currently doing.
Any further questions from the audience at this stage? There's a question here. Just hang on for the microphone and remember to say who you are and where you're from.
I'm Sabrina Cohen. I work at UBS in communication, and I'm in charge of the communication as a CEO. I have two questions. The first one, it's out of curiosity. I would like to know why you put a man as a chief communication officer, because I'm sorry, I'm a woman, and so but it's like I would like to know. That's it. Fine, but that cover, it's a man. You have to choose one. Fine, that cover, it's a man. Okay. Then to the second one, it's when you say that the corporate affairs, and you say, and you go into the chief communication officer for banking, for example, and I'm sure that you're all aware, we have tons of regulations and compliance, so we cannot mix corporate affairs and communication because there are over the wall, off the wall, by the wall rules. So if you have 60 rules per week, it's impossible for a corporate affair person to be in communication for legal reasons, because we risk fines in the banking industry. Therefore, you need to have them separated. And you need to have someone who is a specialist in communication, not in the media, not with Twitter or Facebook, but in terms of how to message and vehicle the outcome of community affairs in the best possible and efficient way. So I wonder if I would like to hear from the McKinsey expert, how can you separate that for something like a bank within the banking industry? Because this is really difficult. Thank you.
We have two questions in one there. Any other questions at this stage, and we'll try and answer them in the round? No? Okay, Medard, do you want to take the second question there about the regulatory sector and how you separate or don't separate regulatory affairs and communications?
Yeah, you need to perhaps separate them from the sheer volume, right? I think that's what you're referring to. I don't necessarily think you need to separate them because you can't communicate whilst in an environment of being heavily regulated. I mean, the pharma industry, to grab back that example, has done it for years, right? They have so many restrictions, and yet they are communicating, of course, within the framework of what's possible. And that's new to banks, but it is not impossible. We'll just have to sort of readapt to the new reality of a heavily regulated being a heavily regulated industry. I don't think you need to separate that. And other industries have proven that it's definitely combinable.
Robin, any thoughts?
I think it's valid that from a sheer, workload perspective, you may want to have, a CRO, chief risk officer, whose job it is to make sure that you comply with the regulations, and that you may then want to separate out, a head of communications. So I can completely see that argument, and you do see a little bit of a parallel story in pharmaceuticals sometimes, where you see somebody who's in charge of product regulation, and then somebody who's in charge of corporate communications. And I think that can be a valid separation, but then I think it's still incumbent on the head of communications to be thinking beyond purely the messaging. So for a bank, the kind of questions that that individual could be thinking about is, what are the fundamental actions I can take to improve my reputation, my standing in society? How can I tackle some of the tough questions like, why do you treat small and medium businesses, so poorly? Why do you treat consumers so poorly who have banked with you for 10 years? So I think in that role, you can still think how you can change the game and change the reputation of the bank in this case, which I do see, with a number of the banks, whilst completely accepting your point that you may want to have different roles in some cases, for workload reasons.
If the moderator may make a comment at this stage, I mean, my personal feeling on this is it's deeply cultural, and part of the problem is that without having communications advisors with great lateral vision that can span a lot of these areas, we can't deal with some of the cultural issues that affect industries like banking. So you do need a leadership team, and it starts with the CEO, but the Chief Communications Officer also has a really important role to play that can really tackle the deep cultural issues that seem to affect organisations, which are both regulatory, communications, organisational design. Again, it's an argument maybe for inverting the relationship between HR and comms.
Can I just make one comment to build on that? We interviewed the CEO of one of the world's largest oil companies recently, which had a massive oil spill 3 years ago. And we said, what's been the long-term impact of that event, on your company and on your corporate culture? And what he said it's created a culture of compliance. So everyone now is sitting there worried about, am I going to create a risk, a safety risk, a safety event? And the heads are down, and it's all focused on the risk management, downside risk management. And anyone who comes up with a slightly innovative, different idea about how to do business differently, or let's go to this market, or look at this market differently, the incentives on that person, are now to keep quiet, keep stum, basically. And I think that also I've seen that in some banks as well. That the culture in some banks is to mitigate the downside risk, especially after the financial crisis. So it's understandable, but I think it is crucial then that there is an element of leadership, and this could be the CEO, or it could be the head of corporate affairs and communications, who's actually then energizing the culture in the company to be more opportunity focused and less focused just on downside mitigation.
And without wishing to compromise my neutrality, I agree absolutely with that. Marion, to the question, the first part of that question, which is why a man, and I flagged the diversity issue before, and it's not just gender diversity in the communications industry, it's obviously racial diversity, it's disability, and it's age. We're a remarkably undiverse industry, and yet giving advice to organisations that obviously serve diverse communities. Is this really part of the fundamental problem about the talent pool from which we draw talent into the space?
Diversity, you mean?
Yeah.
I think communications and corporate affairs actually are, many women, much more than compared to finance or R&D or even marketing. So I think we are very happy as a search firm to have so many women in that industry. So I don't think we have, in particular, that difficulty. Now, if we look at the senior level, we feel that there are, and we don't have absolute figures, maybe you have them, Robin, but we don't have the figures. But the people that I deal with day to day, we see on the most senior level that are more men than on the middle management level in this function.
And Pete, the CEOs that you interviewed were all women, I guess.
No.
All men?
Yes. Yeah. Well, this issue, this is an important issue, I think, for this profession. Well, 70% of our students are women. This is a feminized profession, and it is not talking about it. So this is really a problem. This could be one of the explaining factors of having less power in organization, of all kinds of cultural biases that still play an enormous role in lots of organizations. So I think this gender issue in the United States, they have done some research into this gender and public relations. There are also books about it. It's an interesting point, and I would like to do another round of coding how many of the CCOs in the board are women or men. We didn't take that along in the first round. So that would be interesting as well. Yeah.
Further questions from the audience? Or any comments on something the panel has said? So, sorry, a couple who haven't spoken. There's a gentleman where it's just about the most difficult place to get the microphone, right in the middle, at the back.
I'm Rudi Ramsauer, Nestle. Listening to the gentleman from McKinsey, actually, and this oil company experience, maybe CCO could also stand for Chief Compliance Officer, couldn't it? So there we are with another one. I don't know any other function which, discusses so much its own role and seems to have so many doubts about its value and whether it should sit at the table or not at the table or whatever. I think the fundamental challenge of our function is that communication becomes everybody's job, basically, in organization. I mean, if you have a supply chain officer, chief operations officer, here's another chief, he better understand external stakeholders like environmental groups, like farmers, and so on and so forth. So actually, I think our job as communications officers is really to help our top management, so to speak, to become good communicators. And honestly, I mean, even journalists, they want to talk to the CEO. They don't want to talk less to us. They want to talk to the CEO. So that's why I think there is a fundamental change in our role, where we have to orchestrate much more an organization and communication in an organization in order to get a powerful impact on the society. And that's different from being a spokesperson or being a guy who goes out and meets an NGO or something like that. It's much broader. And there I maybe that's a question I would like to ask the lady from the headhunting organization. What are the competencies really you're looking for when you look for a chief communication officer? I realize that we are hiring less and less communicators into corporate communications. We're hiring journalists, we're hiring NGO leaders, and so on and so forth. So I find maybe we should, worry a bit less about our profession and just think about what the task is and do it.
Meryl, and then
yeah, thank you for that very good question, because I think it is a key question here. What are we looking for? And of course, it depends a little bit on the organization. But what I come across is often that the CEO wants to have a very close relation with the CCO, and therefore we can't put that in a description. The chemistry needs to be good. That's only by meeting each other. That's a very important point. The second point, I think, is business acumen. It's really key. So understanding the business, understanding how decisions are made, being able to have using the same language, but really understanding the business, I think. And I think it's also very important to the CEO is the strategic level of this person coming in. So they are not looking for how to message an issue outside. Of course, that's important, but hopefully there are more people in the organization who can help with that. But they want somebody who can think strategically, if I say this, what happens then? Have the different scenarios ready, when there is a decision made. And I think further leadership skills is something that we are looking for as well. So to be able to engage and reach out to different stakeholders, internally and externally, I think is very important too.
Medal, you had a point.
Yeah, no, I think that goes to the point where I agree with you, Rudy, where we should stop talking about communications and get on with the business. I think that's absolutely right. But you can only do that when you have the absolute trust of your stakeholders. Otherwise, why would they listen to you? Which I think is a plea for getting ourselves at the highest level, because what I do find is that when you are a member of the team, people will trust you more easily. They see you act, they will turn to you because they know that you have the similar information as they have, so they can share with you. And our job is increasingly about making sure that they communicate properly. But I do believe whether the scope is too narrow, whether the function is too small to be a board membership, I think that should be irrelevant. The business should also sort of set some of these principles aside, like we should do on our end.
I think the next panel might have a psychologist on it to help us understand our obsession about where we sit and how we define ourselves. Any further questions? Gentleman there.
Pierre Gode from HSBC. I was wondering if the panel could comment on a thought that occurs to me listening to all of you. It does seem, and I absolutely agree, we spend far too much time talking about communications. I also think we spend far too much time talking about how we help companies or NGOs or government agencies deal with the consequences of decisions. So we're at the output end, and we spend not enough time, although it's changing, talking about how what we do needs to slot into how companies make decisions. So we're all probably in this room familiar with here's a giant stinking pile of poo, fix it. Great. But it would have been far more helpful if you'd asked me a year ago to look at the ingredients before you concocted this giant pile of stinking poo. And we might have been able to influence and help the company come to a better decision. And I just think communications is far too focused on dealing with the output of a long process within a company, where you can actually add very little real value, because you're basically tidying up.
Takes me back to my concern at seeing that data point about financial services being so poorly represented. Medal, do you want to come back on that, because it's directly related to the banking and financial services sector in many ways?
I think we should be much more creative in making sure that we find the right opportunity to get much more to the front end of where decisions are being taken. Again, we can learn to stay with banking. I think we can learn hugely from the pharma industry, to give an example, where it's already not even creative anymore to sit on the reputational committee that decides on whether an active ingredient is going to make it to a medicine or to a pesticide or to a nutritional ingredient or whatever. So in those industries, it's already starting to become a norm that actually communicators, chief communicators, or whatever we call ourselves, are involved much earlier on in the process to make reputational decisions at the front and not fix it at the end. And I think that's what we can learn from and do better. But I think that creativity should come from ourselves. I mean, we should grab that opportunity and not sit and wait until we're being involved, but we should actually proactively start to make such suggestions.
So a question for Pete: if we were the worries about our worries notwithstanding, if we were to be chief reputation officers, or chief citizenship officers, or chief sustainable business officers, the movement would shift more towards being taken more seriously at C-suite level.
Well, I don't know if it's in a name, but it's more
in the role.
Yeah, in the role. Okay, that would be very good. I very much agree that it should be on the front. There's a philosophical level of this too. At this point, that we live in an era where everything is communication. The truth is communicative, reality is communicative, nature is communicative. This is a very interesting point, especially also for corporations, I think, to realize when you are doing business. An organization is also a communication network and nothing more. So that, if you work in communications, you could put this point across, I think. This would be very much a key point of the profession, as I would say, to realize this and act on it. And that means, indeed, that you have to be at the front. and discuss about everything in the organization from the very start of an idea. And then you can, well, forecome a lot of trouble, I think, also.
Is there things that we can learn from the management consultants about how we get on the front foot? Are you on the front foot?
I don't know if there's anything you can learn from management consultants, but I in general. But I do want to offer a thought. Both, there's been offered by the colleagues from HSBC and Nestle around aligning and orchestrating communication, which I completely agree with. And I think in the world of digital communications and social media has intensified that because, and this is then getting more into the task of the Chief Commercial Officer, or Communications Officer, is how can you leverage digital and social media as a weapon to your advantage? So social media, there's over 1 billion Facebook users in the world. It's the fastest growing community. It's the second largest country in the world, or the third, and it'll overtake India, quite soon, just in terms of sheer number. And digital, to our mind, amplifies. So digital will amplify a negative. If you're an airline and you lose somebody's guitar, then there will be a YouTube video very rapidly, which will spread and it'll have millions of users. That's the downside. But it can also amplify the upside. So if you've done something really great, if you've done word of mouth, again, examples of airlines who have improved, their products and their punctuality, then the word of mouth just spreads 100x times faster, and you can win in that market. But once again, I think the marketeers have been on top of digital more quickly than the corporate affairs community. They're already there. They're already thinking, how can I leverage digital? This is a different world I'm operating in. And I think one topic, for this group is how can we leverage digital as a weapon to our advantage in the matter of corporate affairs? And I think part of it starts at the front end of the funnel. The biggest differentiator in our research between successful and unsuccessful companies in external affairs is proactivity. It is being one step ahead of a problem. And digital can help with that because it can help you sense. You may know that in Botswana, in this particular market, I'm getting disgruntlement about these land rights, for example. It can just be much faster. So I think it's a different point. But how can you leverage digital and social media to make your function even more effective?
I have a challenge to Robin on that, which is that I think that social media may be a double-edged sword for communications people. Because if you're seen by the CEO as being the chief social media officer, which is another way that we could all develop, but what would that make us? CSMO, the chief, that suddenly he or she, usually he, thinks you're the person who makes him want to blog or tweet. And it's just another narrowing of that definition into a media channel. So it's more about, can we as communications people really show an understanding of social business rather than just social media, would be my challenge back on that. Further questions from the audience, and I'm going to ask the panelists to wrap up with a 1 minute each. We've got another question from this very fertile, the second row for questioning, and the lady behind. So actually, can we go to the two questions, and you just hand the microphone over your right shoulder when you're done. Yeah, that's it.
Mark Redgrove again. I guess listening to all that's been said from both the panel and the audience, I'm kind of a little confused at what I've got to go back and do in my day job tomorrow. But is it not a surprise then that 25% of the top 500 have a CCO on the board? Because it's the CEO that is kind of deciding the importance of the CCO role. So it's all about changing the CEOs effectively, changing the perspective, the point of view of the CEO about about the importance of the role of the communications person. If he thinks that he does a better job than his communicator, then the importance of the role of the communicator is never going to increase. If you think I sound confused, then I am confused.
I'm going to take that question actually and put it in a similar way as the closing question to the panel. So hold that thought. Thank you.
I'm Yang Yang, communications from Sanofi. I have a question for Marion, actually. And the question is, where do the senior, whatever we call them, chief communications officer, actually where do the senior communications professionals who are sitting on the executive committee or not, where do they come from? Because my thinking is, according to my observation, I see different communications people working at, if I roughly define 3 levels. The basic level is super secretaries. These are junior communications people starting their career. They do posters, they do video, they do everything they're instructed to do, and they are very nice and deliver, and they're liked. But they do not necessarily get respect, and continue to do more of this will not put them anywhere I think they want to be. The second level is people who are masters in their own area, becoming experts. As you said, they deal with media relations, internal, external communications. They are regarded as expert or competent technicians. The third level is actually where maybe the chief communications officer should be, is business acumen, strategic insight, chemistry, relationship. But if I look at that, they do not need to be communicators anymore. They can be anything. They can be doctors, professors, they can be then they can get some people who are experts in communication to support them. So that's why my question to Marianne is, where do these senior people come from? And where does this profession, communications per se, is going?
Thank you. I'm going to ask Marianne to answer that. We've got one very last question. So whilst the microphone works its way to the gentleman at the back, Marianne, do you want to just answer that question? Then we'll take that question and I'll go to the roundup. Marianne?
Yeah, so I do agree you have different levels of where the CCO can come from. I think if they come from the business environment, they can come from marketing communications, growing further to the communications role. They can come from a company secretary. They can come from legal. You have different areas, even business managers. Now, the idea of recruiting people internally into communications is not so easy. People who are not in communications don't see it per se as something that they want to go to, as they feel that that might be a kind of a glass ceiling for the role. But indeed, it happens that they come from the different environments. Now, that is when this person is inside the organization. Having somebody coming from, let's say, marketing, going to another company and become their CCO, we see less happening. It's more that they know internally what their competencies are and then see them moving into that role. And often then the relationship with the CEO is already there.
Gentleman at the back, it's the last question, so I hope it's a good one.
Maybe it's not even a question, maybe it's a comment. My name is Urs Frey. I worked for many years in the Industrie in German. And for these guys here, which work in large organizations, it might surprise you. There are companies with only 5 to 10 people in the comms department. That was my world. And without being somebody without communication skills, you're lost. Because you cannot put somebody in this organization who just manages it, because you have to be very much operational. So there's a little bit a gap between these large organizations where, yes, it can be a person without communications knowledge. I remember Roche, for example, the predecessor of the predecessor of Stefan. He was within the organization, but had the smell of being a good company guy who already ran several projects within the corporation, and that helped for this task. But if you are in a small team, no way you can do it without very much operational skills, and it will be very hard to get out and particularly in engineering companies. If you're not an engineer and you're a communications person, it's very hard to get the full acceptance at the end. But that's the limitation of the job, and you have to accept it.
Which I think loops back to Pete's point that everything is communications now. So back to the question that was asked about 3 questions ago about I'm confused. So what do I go back and do tomorrow? So the final question to the panel, I'm going to start with Pete and then work that way, is to say, what's the one piece of advice that you would give as experts to the audience about the practice of communications in the future, or in fact just tomorrow? Pete.
Well, as a scientist, I'm not very practical anymore, so I would say it's a question of professionalization, and that's one of the main points. As you see, that the CEO, it's depending on situational factors in the organization what the role is of the communication officer, and that's a problem for a profession. I think it shouldn't be situational. It should be, well, just taken for granted that this discipline is there, because without it you can't win. Something like that. Yeah.
Professionalization. Medar?
Very pragmatically, I think I'd shift the balance from making sure that we manage media and employee comms very well to making sure that we are on board with the board and think about strategic issues and engage more on that end. And perhaps related to that, think about training as well, because how much training do we really do when it comes to business acumen that we talk about all the time? How much have we done here in this room together? Think about that.
That was a piece of marketing. You got two pieces of advice for the price of one there. So that was strategic shift and training. Robin.
Two things. I mean, as a corporation, you can only be really distinctive, at a handful of things. With Apple, it's innovation. With Toyota, it's reliability. And I think one thing that you can do in your roles is help define where you're going to win the game externally versus play the game. Are you going to win the game by being the best on quality, on community, on environment, on operational safety? But you can help your organization say, where am I going to win the game versus where am I just going to play and comply? The second thing is we've done research looking into what drives good luck. Who are the lucky people? And one of the main drivers of lucky people is people who smile. If you walk into a room and there's two tables of people, one table, everyone's sitting around looking very glum and no expression on their face. Another table is a table full of people smiling. Which table are you going to go to? It's a really difficult question, but you will go to the table where the people are smiling, and the result of that is that you will have flow and you will have opportunity. And that's one of the reasons why lucky people smile. And I think in your roles, you can smile more and create more flow and more opportunity.
So sitting here, you'd be surprised at the number of you who immediately started to try smiling the moment that Robin said that. Mariel.
Yeah, I think most of the things are already said. I think indeed I do agree. It's about proactively reaching out. And then I don't mean transactional activities, but much more shaping and impacting business decisions on that strategic level. I think that's probably where you need to find the right opportunities. And that has also to do with luck. I don't think if you are open to see those opportunities, you will find them. So find the strategic issues that really make you a different communication officer than your colleague, for example.
So thank you for that, and thank you for you, the audience, for participating. We've got a call for more professionalization, a shift towards a more strategic function, an investment in training, an investment in smiling, defining how we win, not how we play, and this shift again from transactional to influential. Some closing thoughts from me. For me, communications always has to be progressive. The gentleman raised the question about compliance. I think that we have to help CEOs lead with their values and with the values of an organization, not through compliance. For me, communication is not so much about what you say or what the organization says, but by what it does. And therefore, we should communicate through our actions, not just our words. And so we can take some of the actions from this panel, some of the actions from this audience, and apply them to our jobs tomorrow. Maybe we'll see the numbers shift towards having more people, whatever we call ourselves in the future, present at the boardroom table. Thank you to our hosts. Thank you to you for participating. I think drinks and reception is now downstairs. Thank you very much.